Loading. Welcome to Access the Animus.
Hello everyone and welcome to a new video here on Access the Animus. Today we're going to have a look at all the traditional Assassin's Creed elements and nods that have been announced to be back for Assassin's Creed Valhalla or that have appeared in its marketing campaign. As a matter of fact, it does look like the development team behind the game has been trying to make a push to get some of the traditional elements of the Assassin's Creed franchise back in the new chapter, Valhalla. That was also reflected to a very much lesser degree in a few occasions during the marketing campaign, which otherwise has always been focused on the Viking fantasy, on combat, and on the brutal and vicious elements of the game. This video instead will focus on all the elements, the developers, the mechanics, and even just visual callbacks to the classic Assassin's Creed era that we know of up until now, hoping that even more are going to be announced in the coming days. Thus, as usual, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. As sometimes we tend to say within our team and in the community, it's always about the people, so let's start with the dev team. The lead studio for Valhalla is Ubisoft Montreal, which has led the development of several Assassin's Creed games since the first chapter. Among the notable developers that will be back for Valhalla, we can mention three. Narrative director Darby McDevitt, who has worked on at least 7 Assassin's Creed games and a lot of additional documents and books, and was also the lead scriptwriter for Assassin's Creed Revelations and Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Senior art director Raphael Lacoste, who curated the art vision of 4 Assassin's Creed games including the first one, and producer Julien Laferrière, who also worked on 4 games of the franchise. These are some of the most visible developers working on the game, but we did our fair share of research and found out that many other developers working on Valhalla have already been involved in the development and release of several other past Assassin's Creed games, so that might be one of the first indicators that the people working on this project might or should know about some of the elements that longtime fans have been asking for in the last few years. Speaking of people, around 2 months ago, Ubisoft also announced the composers of Valhalla's soundtrack, that is Jesper Kyd, Sarah Schachner, and Einar Selvik. While Selvik is very likely to be on board because of his expertise on Viking themes, melodies, and sounds, Kyd and Schachner are Assassin's Creed veterans and have created some of the most memorable music of the franchise. As a matter of fact, Kyd composed the soundtrack of all the first games up until Revelations, while Schachner worked on Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, Assassin's Creed Unity, and Assassin's Creed Origins. Let's get into the more practical and in-game bits from now on. One of the most visible returning elements and one of the most welcomed ones at that is the Hidden Blade. In fact, and as shown in the cinematic trailer for Valhalla, Eivor will wear and will be able to use the Hidden Blade in the game, which they will receive from the Assassins, or to be more precise, from the Hidden Ones early on in the game. This, in turn, leads to stealth kills that are very similar to those from the past Assassin's Creed games, in that players will be able to one-hit kill even the mightiest of enemies, though in some cases they will have to perform a quick-time minigame in order to pull it off. Hoods were never taken out of the equation completely, even in the latest chapters Assassin's Creed Origins and Odyssey. Still, and on average, they were recently mostly in there for cosmetic purposes and yes, also to keep one of the core visual elements of the Assassins alive throughout the franchise. The hood will be back in Valhalla and players will be able to toggle it on and off at any time in the game, and differently from what happened in Odyssey, the hood should also stay up during cutscenes. In addition to how it was represented in the last 2 games though, the hood will also be tied to the stealth sequences that the player will find throughout the game's map. In fact, the game will contain several zones called distrust areas where, if entered while equipping a hood, the enemy detection range will be reduced. And speaking of stealth sequences, one of the most coveted elements by hardcore and longtime AC fans that will be back in Valhalla is social stealth. Described by a Ubisoft spokesperson for what pertains Valhalla as the ability to manually use your hood, nearby people and situation to your advantage to blend into the crowd, social stealth was one of the main features of all the Assassin's Creed games to a greater or lesser degree up until Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and being able to see it back in action has already hyped quite a number of fans. Another staple of the franchise since the first game and up until Assassin's Creed Syndicate that will be back in Valhalla will be proper eagle vision, as in the Sixth Sense that some of the characters of the franchise possessed, which allowed them to feel how people and objects related to them, to find interactive elements of the world, and especially to identify targets. In Origins and Odyssey, proper eagle vision was replaced both by a feature also trickily called eagle vision that involved using an eagle to scan locations and enemies and additional skills to find objects and documents on the ground. Valhalla will have both features, with the ability of scanning locations from the sky being called Raven Vision and the actual eagle vision being called Odin Sight, to match the same name that was given to the sense in the novel Assassin's Creed Last Descendants Fate of the Gods by the Viking assassins, or shall we say hidden ones, that lived roughly a century after the events of Valhalla. Unrealistically indestructible haystacks have always been a recurring element in the franchise, where players could plunge in from incredible heights or just bide their time for the perfect assassination. That was not the case anymore in the latest chapter of the franchise, Odyssey, because in the words of game director Scott Phillips, hiding in haystacks always felt sort of silly. Valhalla instead will bring back hiding in haystacks and also the assassinations that players might want to perform from said locations. Also differently from Odyssey, doing a leap of faith will not propel the player automatically out of the haystack. It will actually always require a manual input to get out of it. Another classic AC element that was removed from Odyssey and Unity before it was the so-called memory corridor, that is the digital area where players can run around and test some of their fighting moves that serves as a loading screen while the Animus is loading its simulation. As we tested from the demo, the memory corridor will indeed be back in Valhalla with an Aurora Borealis in the background to match the visual themes surrounding almost every asset connected to the game. For lack of a better term, X-ray assassinations are assassinations where the camera shows a slow motion of the hidden blade killing the enemy from their inside. Game director Benoit Richet recently confirmed that the X-ray assassinations were not just part of the gameplay overview trailer of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, but will also be part of the gameplay and will be player triggered. How that is a classic or recurring Assassin's Creed element? Well, it isn't, but there is a chance that it is a nod to an early Assassin's Creed 1 trailer that basically showed a similar scene. Take a look.
Or destroy it. They were the assassins.
In case you haven't watched our Animus Anomalies video or decided to avoid spoilers, please fast forward to the next element, as this bit will be pretty spoilery. In fact, as we mentioned in our video, Rebecca Crane, one of the fan favorite characters from the modern day part of the series, will be back. We don't know much about her role in Valhalla yet, but in the bit that we tested she was handling Layla's adventure within the Animus Anomaly, so we can surmise that she'll check the Animus sessions as she used to do in the past chapters of the Assassin's Creed franchise. Fingers crossed we'll also get to see Sean Hastings, and speaking of Sean, this is more of a wild guess, but there is a chance that the database, that is the section in the menu of past games containing useful information about historical characters and locations, which was mostly written by Sean Hastings, could also make a comeback in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. As a matter of fact, the gameplay overview trailer showcased an in-game menu that featured a tab called Codex. Maybe this tab will have a different purpose, but when independently asked about a potential return of the database entries in the game, narrative director Darby McDavid played coy and just said that he missed the database too. Another wild guess, but once again grounded on some actual information about the game. As you might or might not remember from our Animus Anomalies video, we did make a comparison of the similarities between the anomalies themselves and the truth puzzles from the early Assassin's Creed games. Again, we suggest you move to the next element if you'd like to avoid spoilers. Thus, this did not only feel like the parkour in the Colosseum vault, but also in a way like the truth puzzles from Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood, in that, during the puzzle solving process and especially after it, you receive bits of information potentially connected to the modern day or the first civilization. Senior associate producer Damien Leiry also told Survivor.com that there's going to be several anomalies in the world, which would make them even more similar to the glyph and cluster puzzles, as all the anomalies could hold bits of the same message or video, which could then be revealed once the player completes them all. But that's just speculation at this point. Thus, the truth puzzles might not be back as is, but a version of their concept might be back through the Animus Anomalies. After taking a break in Odyssey, the clash between the Assassins and Templars, or more specifically, that of the original versions of their organizations, the Hidden Ones and the Order of the Ancients, will be back in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Now, we don't know how that is going to be portrayed, but we do know that the game will act, quoting narrative director Darby McDavid's words, as the bridge between the Hidden Ones and the Order of the Ancients as set up in Origins and Odyssey, and the Templars and Assassins as we know them in later games. Fingers crossed that the game will properly delve into the Millennial War the same way or better than the original games did. To wrap it up, we'd like to show you one more thing. It's not a game feature per se, but actually a series of nods to the early Assassin's Creed trailers that can be found within the Valhalla CGI one. In fact, as some of you might have noticed, and especially as firstly discovered by Assassin's Creed Universe, whose link you can find in the description, the cinematic trailer of Assassin's Creed Valhalla was filled with references to old and recent CGI trailers for the brand. This does not mean that the marketing campaign for the game has also pushed for the return of classic elements of the series. Actually, it's so far from that, but these references can still hit a few nostalgic fans. Take a look. And that was it for the list of all the traditional Assassin's Creed elements that have been announced or shown for Assassin's Creed Valhalla up until now, and we can't wait to see if even more of those are going to be announced or just appear in the final version of the game. What do you think about them? Are you happy they will be back, or do you believe the games are better without them? As always, let us know in the comments, and write to us if you feel like we missed any other element that could have fit the list. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing to our channel and turning the notifications on so you don't miss any of our future updates. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.